Well, the Locked On Predators tour of the Central Division continues today. We have Jack Bushman from Locked On Blackhawks joining us today. Jack, how's it going, man? Thanks for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I just couldn't be more stoked that hockey season has finally arrived. We were talking before recording, and all of us were kind of in the same boat, feeling like it was getting real dry there after the first few days of free agency. So good that some preseason games are back, and we're just a few weeks away from the start of the regular season. So couldn't be more stoked to be on the show with you two today. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think us and our listeners agree. It's nice to have some fresh content out there instead of either like season in review or let's look ahead at this player. Like it's good that we actually now have actual games to break down, and an exciting time because there's a lot of changes happening in the Central Division. Obviously, for you guys, maybe the changes aren't as great. So Jack, I do want to ask you kind of a general question. What's sort of the vibe among the Blackhawks fan base going into this season? Because, it's been a very tumultuous last year or so. And of course, now, you lose a lot of key players, prospect of losing some other franchise guys, over the next year or so. So I got to ask, like, what's the mood around Blackhawks fan base right now?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag depending on who you're asking. I mean, and I can understand the feelings, the many feelings that Blackhawks fans have at this point, because it feels likely that Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane are probably in their final year with the Blackhawks. It still really hasn't quite resonated with me that, like, my two childhood idols, this could be their last ride here in Chicago. So I get the frustration and, trading Alex DeBrincat, letting go of Dylan Strome, two of the better players that the Blackhawks had last year. But I also think there are fans out there who are optimistic about what new GM Kyle Davidson is building here, because while the DeBrincat trade, I think every Blackhawks fan and many fans across the league would agree that was probably a loss for the Blackhawks. I don't think they got a lot in return, but everything they've done, they've stuck to the plan that Kyle Davidson laid out when he first got hired. He referenced how the only way to go about this truly for the Blackhawks is to completely rebuild the prospect pool. The biggest problem for the Blackhawks was that they weren't good enough and they didn't have enough help coming through the system in the next few years to kind of keep this thing going, right? They really had their backs against the wall, and I feel like Kyle Davidson realized that, hey, help's not coming. This isn't going to get better anytime soon. And the Blackhawks addressed those needs in this offseason heavily. I mean, they selected 11 players in the 2022 NHL draft. 3 of those came in the first round. They've really keyed in on knowing they have to develop better. They've really struggled at getting talent from their minor leaguers to come up and make an impact on the NHL level. So those are kind of the areas that they're really focused on right now. And I think there are people that believe that brighter days, they're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, that they believe that better days are ahead. But the realistic situation is that it's not going to be anytime soon. And that kind of has the fan base not as intrigued. And I can't blame them. I mean, this team on paper does not look very sharp whatsoever. And from the front office standpoint, they really don't even want to be competing. They got their sights set on, high first round picks in the 2023 NHL draft, which is looking like it could be, you never know how it's going to turn out. But from afar, it's looking like it could be one of the better drafts that we've had in quite a while. So with that on the horizon and the Blackhawks having the possibility of not only getting a high pick if their season doesn't go very well, but if you trade Kane, you trade Toews, we have a couple other pieces, and Andreas Athanasiou and Max Domi, who are brought in on one-year deals in the offseason, they're likely to get dealt given that this is looking like a 4 or 5 year plan down the road. So the Blackhawks really are just kind of focused on building back better through their prospect pool and, hitting on some picks in the first round of the NHL drafts, getting as many of those as possible. And when it's not, winning now in an original 6 franchise, it's hard for folks to really be intrigued with what they're doing. I was down at training camp earlier this week, and it was scary how few people there were there to watch the Blackhawks. I mean, even last year, they traded for Seth Jones, they traded for Marc-Andre Fleury. There were people buzzing about the Blackhawks potentially, and this year there's just no one really all that enticed by what the Blackhawks are putting out on the ice. So yeah, there's a lot of mixed feelings going around the city right now. It kind of just depends on which person you're going to ask. But at the end of the day, I don't think Kyle Davidson had any choice but to go this route again, because there wasn't enough help coming. The Blackhawks don't have a ton of money. Sure, they're going to get rid of probably Toews and Kane, but it's not going to be enough to completely revamp this team and make them a Stanley Cup contender immediately. So the only option here was really to go about this full-blown rebuild that's now implemented here in Chicago.
So you're talking about things are going to be looking a little bit different in Chicago. What have you seen or heard from head coach Luke Richardson kind of as Chicago's in this transition phase? Like, what is he saying? What indications is he giving to the fan base and to the players as they're walking through this? Because this is all new territory.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of funny because training camp opened up with a press conference with just Luke Richardson and Kyle Davidson. And Luke Richardson, when he was first hired here, he said, "Hey, look, the front office, they can do all they want and try not to, theoretically make us good this year." Kyle Davidson would never admit to tanking, but just look at the team. That kind of tells you all you need to know. But Luke Richardson was saying, we're going to go in there and we're going to try to win every night. Like, I don't care what the front office is telling us. The message in the locker room is that we're still going to compete. We're going to try to get better each and every day. And honestly, Luke Richardson, I know it's still very early, obviously, in his tenure as Blackhawks head coach, but I think he's done everything right so far up to this point. Like, the changes that he's implemented on the ice were very overdue, especially in the defensive zone. He's kind of changing up how the Blackhawks are going to play defense as a whole. They previously ran man-to-man coverage a little bit under Jeremy Colleton, and now they're going back to a zone and a box one. And he also just wants to change the mentality of what the team is trying to do on the ice. And Jeremy Colleton's system, it was a system where you had to be in the right spot at the right time. You had to make this type of play in order for things to have success. Luke Richardson really wants to throw that out the window and just let the players go and react, go and play the game they've played for their entire lives. Because I feel like that, with how fast the game of hockey is, it's hard to build in those design scenarios or those situations and recognize that you're in the middle of it when it's happening. Like, I feel like hockey is so reactionary and so much of making adjustments on the fly. That's really refreshing to hear from the mentality of our new head coach. And other than that too, all the players are ecstatic. I mean, you would think the Blackhawks are ready to make a run for the Stanley Cup with how happy they are in training camp, because that's the presence that Luke Richardson has. I mean, he demands respect and demands his players to work hard, but he's also not there to intimidate anyone or to play games or tactics or, kind of be hard on some players to get the best out of them. That's not the style that he has, and the guys are really reacting to it well. We even heard Max Domi in a press conference say this might be the most fun he's ever had at a training camp, and this is a Blackhawks team that's projected to finish in the bottom three in the NHL. You wouldn't think you'd hear those type of things, but that's how much the players already enjoy having Luke Richardson around. So I'm really excited about how this year is going to go, not in terms of wins and losses, but just how the Blackhawks play for him. I think they're going to play with a lot of intensity and a lot of passion. And if they can compete not every night, but more nights than not, and not have those 4-1, 4-0, 5-0 losses, and we can see improvements, that will give us fans some confidence that, hey, maybe we do finally have the right guy here, and maybe, there is some better things to come for this organization after it's just been really, really rough the last few years when the team didn't have a direction or an identity. Luke Richardson has come in and implemented that, and I'm really excited to see how it's going to go in his first year this season.
You kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but obviously one of the big talking points for Blackhawks fans right now is what's Jonathan Tate's future? What's Patrick Kane's future? Obviously, we know they're both free agents because they signed those 20 contract, way back in the day. The bromance is real, folks. How do you see each of their situations playing out? Do you see them maybe being deadline bait for some bigger team? Do you see them maybe waiting till the season ends and kind of going off on their terms? How do you see this kind of playing out for both of them? Or is there a chance maybe one of them changes their tune and says, you know what? I will. Chicago's my home. I will stick around and lead the next generation.
Yeah, it's really intriguing because I think it could go any direction. I do think one thing I will say, it is more likely, I think, than not that they do end up on another team by the trade deadline. I think the deadline is what makes the most sense. But with how much players are enjoying Luke Richardson, like if things, go well and the Blackhawks are playing hard, maybe that entices them to stay. But I don't know. I think at the end of the day, the Blackhawks too are probably going to want to move them, considering the assets that they can get. And with Patrick Kane, you could get an absolute haul. I mean, potentially multiple first-round picks, even at this stage of his career. He just put up the third most points he's ever had in a season last year as a 33-year-old. Like a fine wine, he's getting better with age, truly, right in front of our eyes here. And I think the Blackhawks, I think the worst case scenario for them would be to wait and keep them at the end of the year and see if they want to stay then, and then they lose them in free agency and get nothing. Like for the Blackhawks, it's so weird. You don't want to move these franchise icons, and from all sources, it seems like they're not going to approach Kane and Toews about waiving those no movement clauses. They're going to be the ones that have to kickstart that conversation. But if they never have that conversation, that puts the Blackhawks organization in a really weird spot and gives them the chance that they get nothing for either of those two guys at the end of the day. So I do think, sadly, it's more likely than not that they get traded, but it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world to see them stay. I think before we just go saying anything for sure, we need to see how the season goes with Luke Richardson, because the latest we've heard from each of these two when they talk to the media at training camp is we didn't have any conversations with Kyle like that over the summer. We're just focused on being here, want to see how things go this year, want to see the mood and the vibe around the team. And then when the time comes, we'll make that decision. But as of right now, everything's still kind of up in the air. So it's really going to be a wild scene throughout the course of the year, and I feel bad for those two because they're going to get hounded by the media about those questions and until that day, more likely than not, comes in my mind. So yeah, just kind of a very weird situation for two icons of the franchise to be in, right? Like it's not the way anyone, I don't think, wants it to end, but unfortunately, this is the situation we're in.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to give you a chance to kind of quiz us on some Nashville Predators knowledge here in just a second. First, though, I want to mention today's show brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net, that's your number one source for college and pro football betting this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, matchups, all that good stuff from every game across both college and NFL. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games, not just football, but MLB, MMA, boxing, golf, and, of course, hockey. They just put out a bunch of futures for this upcoming NHL season, so take a look at that. So be sure to head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Jack, so we talked a little bit about the Chicago Blackhawks, of course. Now I'm going to give you a chance to turn the tables. What do Blackhawks fans want to know about the Nashville Predators heading into this season?
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this crossover for quite a while because I just have absolutely no idea what this Nashville Predators team is going to be this season. So I guess my first question.
Welcome to the club.
Does it sound familiar?
Yeah.
I guess my first question would be, how would you two grade this offseason from the Predators? They gave Forsberg, obviously, the big 8-year contract. Mm-hmm. They go out and add a top 6 piece in Nito Niederreiter. They add Ryan McDonough to the defense, which I think the top 3 is one of the strongest in the NHL. UC Saros, especially against the Blackhawks, the dude's always standing on top of his head, it seems like. How do you feel about the Predators offseason? Was it good enough? Not good enough? You like it? You don't? What's the feel about it?
It's so interesting. I would have answered this question a little bit differently, but at training camp the other day, Matt Duchene made a really interesting comment, and Nick and I had talked about this on the podcast. But he was talking about the postseason, and in case anybody forgot, we did not. The Predators were swept in 4 games by the Colorado Avalanche. It was excruciating. It was as bad as you imagine it would be. But Matt Duchene said it was really good we lost that way. It's better we lost this way, than had the Predators gone into the second round or the third round. They could have gone ahead and pretended like, well, hey, if this had just been a little different, we could have been, and Matt Duchene said, look, the bottom line is we were not a Stanley Cup winning team last season. And so losing the way they did really shined a very bright light and where you could see the major flaws in the Nashville Predators. And that was second line scoring. And that was just not having the defensive depth that the team needed. Of course, it did not help that UC Saros was injured in the playoffs. So they also went out and picked up a guy you're familiar with, Kevin Lankinen, signed him. So we have some goalie stuff going on here as well. So I think the Predators really took an honest look by force at what they needed, who they needed to be, what they needed to add. And I think that General Manager David Poile did a good job going out and getting that. But now it's, that adage in hockey where you can put something on paper that looks like it's going to be great and you don't necessarily know how it's going to translate to the ice. But I think that they went and did what they really needed to do most importantly in the offseason. So in that respect, I feel pretty encouraged about what they did.
And would you say the moves that they made would take them to that next level? Because looking at the Central Division, and this is a conversation that I've had with every host of a Central Division team. I've done a few Central Division crossovers, and we've all kind of agreed that after Colorado, this division is up for grabs. And there are some good teams here. I just don't know what order it's going to go in, and I think nobody does. Do you feel like the Predators made enough moves and have enough talent right now to get back into the Stanley Cup playoffs once again? Or do you feel like they need to make a move or two at the deadline in order to do so if they are in fact competing when that time comes?
Well, I think this is definitely a playoff team. And to answer your earlier question, where does this put them? Are they Stanley Cup contenders? Are they back in that top tier like they were a few years ago? Probably not, let's be honest. But are they better than they were last year? At least on paper, yeah, 100%. And you mentioned all the new guys they brought in, but you're also, you think about the new guys, but also you think of who's coming back. And UC Saros, you mentioned, big year last year. Roman Josi, we know he made history with one of the best offensive performances by a defenseman in 30 years. Philip Forsberg, Matt Duchene, 80-point seasons between the two of them. Ryan Johansson, big bounce back year. And then you look at guys like Alexander Carrier, who really burst onto the scene last year. Dante Fabro, who settled into his own as a solid, 5'4" defenseman. There's a lot of talent on this team that's either in their prime or seem poised to kind of take that next step in their career. And, earlier this week, we talked to our friends from Locked On Avalanche kind of about this same thing. Where does everybody shuffle in the Central Division? And look, I don't think either Ann and I are calling the Preds Stanley Cup contenders or frontrunners by any stretch of the imagination. And I think we're all pretty set that Colorado is probably going to be the favorites to win the Central. But I'll tell you where Nashville is. They are in a prime spot to kind of be that disruptor team. It seems like for a while, there's always one team that just everything goes right for them right at the end of the year. Their goaltending gets hot. They have depth scoring just go on a tear. They have a legitimate first line that can take games over. Nashville kind of has that vibe. As long as they can stay healthy, and as long as nobody on the team, especially in that core group, take a big step back this year, I think you're going to see Nashville in a prime spot at the end of the year.
Now, one other question I had is, what would you deem a successful season for the Nashville Predators this year? And a second parter off of that too is, do you worry at all about kind of being in this tweener stage where you're not quite good enough to win the cup, but you're not going to be bad enough to receive a good enough draft pick? And I don't know, this is just a thought I had about the Predators because it was a situation the Blackhawks found themselves in for forever. They weren't good enough to really compete, but they weren't bad enough to go and get a franchise-altering player, and they were just kind of staying stagnant. And that's what kind of really cost them and put them into the situation they're in right now. Does that thought ever cross your mind when, the Predators kind of gear up to make another run like this and make some bigger moves? Does that worry you at all?
I'm going to let you go first, Ann, because I know we have
I'll
a little bit of contrasting thoughts on this.
Yeah. So your first question, I would say what a successful season would look like for the Nashville Predators. I really do think that the Nashville Predators have to make it past the first round of the playoffs for this to be considered a successful season. They were in the Stanley Cup Finals in 2017, and they have not been able to get out of the first round of the playoffs since then. And I think if they don't do it this season, I think there's going to be some heat on the seat of general manager David Poile because they have got to take some steps forward. They keep saying that they're going to, they're retooling, they're using all of the right lingo. But the bottom line is the Predators have been exiting in the first round of the playoffs. And I think that is what has to happen for this season to be successful. Anything past that is fantastic. But I think that's the bar that this team has to hit if this is going to be considered a successful season. Go ahead, Nick. You just go ahead. You go ahead.
I want to address the situation of kind of being in the middle ground, not sucky enough to get high draft picks, but not good enough to make it to the Stanley Cup Finals. Look, and maybe this is a topic that we can dive into a little bit more in the next segment, because I do want to talk about kind of the Blackhawks take on this. I think if you have momentum, you should be going for it. I hate the idea of, oh, you're in the middle ground, so we need to go actively the other way to make ourselves good again. I hate that. I think it is the most counterproductive thing in sports. I think if you have any semblance of talent that you believe could get you to the promised land, you have to do everything in your power to build upon that talent. And look, we've dealt with this in Nashville for the past couple of years because there's a lot of people that are like, oh, they're not good enough to beat Colorado. They're not good enough to get to the first round. We need to suck for 3 years and win every draft lottery and then look at the championship team we're going to have and blah, 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 blah. Look at what happened last year. Yeah, we got swept, but their highest paid player on the team was Roman Josi, who you saw what he did. Our second highest paid player on the team is Philip Forsberg, who had a career year. Our third highest paid player on the team is Matt Duchene, who had a career year, and Ryan Johansson, who had a big bounce back year. And you keep going down the list, and you see where I'm talking about, where your stars are actually playing like stars. This isn't like San Jose or LA from a few years ago, or Philadelphia from, recently, where all of your highest paid players, guys that are locked in to like these 7-year contracts worth all this insane amount of money, are spinning their wheels or costing the team's games or have lost a step. This is a team where your highest paid people, your core, are actively going out and having some of the best seasons of the career. That's not a team that needs to rebuild. That's a team that just needs to build upon what they have. They don't need to tear out the foundation and start from scratch. They just need a fresh coat of paint on the side of the house. They need to fix some paneling. That's what the Predators need to do. And so, no, there is a lot of people in the Preds fan base that's going to agree with me. They're saying, oh, the Preds are spinning their tires going nowhere's fast. They have made the playoffs since the first lockout all but 3 seasons. Only the Pittsburgh Penguins have had more in that span than the Nashville Predators. I think the Predators are actually tied with Washington in terms of how many playoff appearances they've had. But think about that. Only the Pittsburgh Penguins, who have won 3 Stanley Cups, one of the 2 dynasties of the era, have had more success in getting to the playoffs than Nashville. That's something a lot of people are overlooking when they talk about this team. This is a team that consistently knows how to get in the postseason. And as they showed in 2017, all you need to do is get there to have a shot at the Stanley Cup.
And one thing I will say in terms of hockey in particular, like you just mentioned, if you get in and you get hot, you have a chance with anyone. That's just how this game works. So I agree with the situation that the Predators are in. It's not time to hit that point yet, and they do have a good core of pieces. I agree. They just need to find the right pieces to mix and match them with to take that next step. I was just curious. It seems like it is a topic going on in Nashville, at least, because that was something that the Blackhawks and our fans kind of fell into the last couple of years, was that debate of what direction are we really heading in here. So I was just curious to hear your guys' take on that.
Yeah. And I kind of want to hear your opinion too, because this is kind of a topic that almost kind of spurred the topic in Nashville a little bit, because we see what the Blackhawks are doing. I mean, I don't know about you. I would call this season a pretty blatant tank job.
What? No.
I mean, but
Kyle Davidson has never said the word tank. Never. Not once.
Yeah. But okay, but what's your opinion on it? Are you pro, like, we should try to lose as many games as possible and maybe have a shot at Connor Bedard? Or are you more of like, you know what, we're going to be bad either way, it doesn't matter, you know, where we are in the draft, there's other issues like drafting and developing that we need to work on?
Yeah, it's kind of both, because I feel like the Blackhawks, like, the season's going to go where it's going to go, especially in the second half. Again, they're likely to trade Toews and Kane, Athanasiou, Domi. They could move some other veteran pieces potentially. Like, I think the second half is going to be pretty gross regardless, but you never know, because it's a lottery. Like, the Blackhawks could be the worst team by a landslide and they could still end up with the 3rd overall pick. So yeah, I'm always wary of, going out there and losing. I don't think that's ever the purpose. And it's nice to know that Luke Richardson has basically thrown that away and said, listen, I'm going to make Kyle Davidson's job hard, because we're going to be going out there and trying to compete each and every game. And I think that's kind of a more valuable lesson to be taught for some of these young guys who are going to be here in 4 to 5 years, and hopefully will be pieces of the puzzle to kind of help turn this thing around. But I will say it's really enticing when you're dangling Connor Bedard right there, and you're like, now that's how you fix a rebuild. You go and get, one of the premier, probably going to be the 1st overall pick. It would be absolutely blasphemy if you didn't.
Well, we said that last year too with Shane Wright.
Well, that's true.
That is true. It would be a wild scene if Connor Bedard got passed up by somebody. But it's tough, because you know that the end goal, you feel like you can achieve it a little bit faster if you get a player like that. But you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, I feel like, in this situation, because even if you're bad, you're not guaranteed anything. So I think you kind of just got to go and play the games and see where it's going to go from there. But I don't think they have the depth or the talent really to compete to be winning games night in and night out. So I think that part's probably going to take care of itself. I think the losses are going to come. We'll see if it's, enough to have them at the bottom of the standings like a lot of people think, but we've heard that the coaching staff wants to, be fighting out there. So it's a really weird mix, though. That's what I'll say. Like, I see both sides of it, but you just can't guarantee anything. You got to go and play the games for a reason. So I guess we're just going to have to see what happens. I wish I could give you a better answer than that, but I'm torn myself. I don't want this team to purposely be losing. And I think that's a bad mentality to have each and every game. Like, imagine if your head coach is like, all right, well, you're going to sit tonight because you're doing too good. Like, what? I mean, that's just never a good thing for your coach to be saying. So yeah, I don't think that's the way Luke Richardson's going to be handling it. And we're just kind of have to see what the results are after 82 games.
Hey, if he wants to bench Patrick Kane before the Preds games.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're going to see what happens. But before we wait and see what happens, let's talk about what we think is going to happen. How do you think the Central Division's going to shake out by the end? Just throw out your Central Division predictions. Who's going to be the surprise? Where's it going to shake out?
Okay, so I will go based off my Central Division rankings that I filled out when we had that poll a couple of weeks back, I believe it was. Colorado, I think everyone's going to have them at number 1. I think that's pretty much a given. 2, I have the St. Louis Blues. I do have some concerns about Jordan Binnington, but they have a very strong core. Their defense is really good. Tons of young talent. They should be able to score a lot of goals. If Jordan Binnington is on top of his game, the St. Louis Blues are a dark horse in the Western Conference. They gave the Avs as good of a run as anybody did last year. I mean, they were seconds away from forcing overtime in Game 6, and who knows how the rest of that goes. So I would not count the Blues out whatsoever. 3 through 5 is where I'm really like, I don't know. I had the Dallas Stars coming in at number 3 because I believe in their defense and goaltending just a little bit more than I believe in Nashville's. I had Nashville coming in at number 4. That's just the way I see it. Now, we could talk about this.
We're going to love you through it, but it hurts a little bit.
I had Nashville coming in at number 4 just behind them. I think this 3 through 5 is going to be very close in my opinion. And I actually think Minnesota is going to regress a little bit this year. I don't see them scoring the amount of goals they had last season. I do have some concerns about Marc-Andre Fleury's consistency night in and night out at this point. I know when he's playing his best, he's as good as they come. But if things are shaky in front of him, there are some games where he's not stopping everything and it can get out of hand in a hurry, as we saw in Chicago a few times last year. So I have the Wild coming in 5th. 6th, I have the Winnipeg Jets. 7, I have my Chicago Blackhawks because I do not think they're worse than the Arizona Coyotes. That team makes me want to throw up when I look at their roster.
Fair. Yeah. I mean, fair.
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure if Robin Leano would agree or take umbrage with that. It's funny. We were having that conversation when me and Robin were doing our crossover. It seems like maybe the Coyotes
they're terrible
there that maybe if they get hot, can kind of leapfrog to not last. I mean, it's one of those things where it's two awful teams, but it feels like one is actually trying to put the future in the hands of their young players, and one is just trying to actively be bad. So it's a weird debate. I want to go back to the Dallas Nashville thing. I take no umbrage with St. Louis being number 2 because I agree.
Yeah.
They look like the team that was the biggest threat to Colorado in all of the playoffs last year. And yes, I'm including the Tampa Bay Lightning in that as well. So I'm going to go with that. Dallas over Chicago. Or I'm sorry, Dallas over Nashville. I was looking at the wrong logo. Don't shake your head at me.
I'm just a little judgy. Judgy, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean that to me is, I mean, I get it. I just kind of want to go back with the defense being a little bit more reliable. I think Ryan McDonough kind of fills more of the complete status that Nashville needed to maybe have the edge defensively. And not saying, I mean, Dallas has guys like Miro Heiskanen and Asa Lindell, who are obviously very good defensemen, but there's still question marks about John Klingberg. Who's going to fill that role? Is Thomas Harley ready for a top 4 role yet? So I think Nashville defensively has more of their question marks filled out on the blue line than I think Dallas does. But other than that, yeah, I mean, I take no issue with anything on your list.
Yeah.
I don't know. Dallas, I feel like, especially too with how poor Sagan and Ben were last year, and they still nearly beat the Calgary Flames in that first round series. I don't know. I feel like if those two bounce back, I feel like the Stars have potential to be there near the top. But I think that 3 through 5 is 100% up for grabs. I would not be surprised to see those 3 come out in any combo whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I do not disagree with you there. All right. Well, Jack, thank you so much for joining us, man. It's always good to hear from other Central Division hosts, and I am sure we will have you on throughout the season as the Preds and Blackhawks start to go head-to-head in some of these games. But until we get there, tell our listeners how they can catch you every day.
Yeah, you can find the Locked On Blackhawks podcast for free wherever you get your podcast. If you want to check out some of the social accounts, you can look at capital L, capital O _ Blackhawks on Twitter. As for my personal account, you can find me at Jack Bushman 2 if you want to tag along for the roller coaster ride that is bound to be the Chicago Blackhawks season. I don't know what direction it's going to go. I don't know if Toews and Kane are going to be back. We're going to have to find out, and that's why I'm excited for things to get going.
That roller coaster ride seems like riding a roller coaster that's on fire while also doing cocaine. So absolutely ready to dive into that one. Anne, why don't you let the listeners know where they can find you?
You can find me on Twitter at AnnK_Mama on Ice.
And you can find my work at ontheforecheck.com. Follow me on Twitter at _NSMorgan. And for you Blackhawks fans listening, if you want to keep up on the Preds throughout the regular season, subscribe to the Locked On Predators podcast. It's free wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at LO_Predators. Chirp us during the season, just whatever you want to do. Talk hockey with us. Come say hi. And if you feel like it, you can visit our YouTube page. Just search Locked On Predators. Give us a subscribe. You'll always know when we put out Blackhawks related content, whether that's pregame or whatever. And so, yeah, we are excited to see you guys. So, Jack, thank you so much for joining us, man. Happy to have you on. We will see you again this season for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get together for a crossover whenever the Hawks and Preds battle for the first time.
For sure.
And for the rest of you guys, have a good weekend. We'll see you next week with all new episodes of both Locked On Preds and Locked On Blackhawks.